Hello everyone. Continuation to the lecture of Introduction to the Database Management System. In this lecture, we will discuss the purpose of database system and what are the drawbacks of file system over a database system. In the previous lecture, we have discussed about what is database management system, and what are the applications of database system. Now, in this lecture, we first discuss what is a file system, and then we'll discuss what are the drawbacks with the file system, and also we discuss what are the advantages of database system. So actually, this purpose of database system will cover 3 points. So once you understand this particular concept, you can understand the three relevant concept. The first, you can understand with this what are the drawbacks of the file system. Also, this point also cover what are the advantages of database system, and this point also cover what is difference between file system and database system. So before start to with this particular what is drawback with the file system, you must know what is the file system, because if you don't know the file system, you're not able to understand what are the drawbacks of file system and what are the advantages of database system. So in early days, whenever database application is built, it is based on the top of the file system. But when it is built on the top of the file system, that file system have itself lots of limitation. So if you know the file system, how it is actually work, then you can understand what are the drawbacks with the file system. So actually, file system will decide how the data stored in the hard disk. It also represent the way in which how data read from the hard disk. It also represent the way how the data will be write in database. So in short, the file system will represent how read and write data into the hard disk. So as in the hard disk, we actually store a data, but file system is the interface which will decide how the data will store into the hard disk. So this all the reading and writing from the data from the hard disk, it's handled by the file system. So file system will get installed on your machine when you install the operating system. So for a Windows, a file system is NTFS, which is called as New Technology File System. For Linux, it is EST, which is Extendable File System. So you can get this file system. I will give the example of this file where you can see this file system. So when you try to format your pen drive, so when you right click on that pen drive, you will get the format option, along with you will get the file system by which you can format. So you can, in that scenario, you can see the file system is NTFS for the window. So in short, this NTFS acts as the interface between you and hardware and software. So this file system is actually decide how to store a data. So in short, this file system will also decide how to store a data, and we have discussed in the previous lecture, a database also used to store a data. So again, we have comes to the point that if both are used for the storing data, what is the difference? So I will give the example how the file system is actually store data and how the database system also store data. So this is when, suppose I want to store one text data. So I will first create one notepad. So in that notepad, suppose I want to store the roll number and names of the student. So I will create one notepad. In that notepad, I will store the roll number 1 with name Sagar. Likewise, then I store the roll number 2 Vivek. Likewise, I will store the information. Then once I have stored this information in notepad, then I will click on the save to store this notepad. Then it will ask to show it will show where to store. So it will provide the option like you can store C, D, E, F. Now these are the drive systems, are nothing but the system which provided by the file system. So means once your file is created, when you try to store, your file is passed to the file system. So for the Windows, it is NTFS. So then file system will provide how this data store into your hard disk. So that file system creates a different drives, which is C, D, E, F. On that drive, depends upon your location, this file system will store your data into the hard disk. And when your data, once you're storing data in your hard disk, it's stored as a permanent storage. So later, if you want that file, you are just going to the GUI of that notepad and you're just double click on that notepad. Double click means you are reading that file. So that time again, that file is come from the hard disk where you are stored in your hard disk. It double click, it will comes to file system, and then file system will open that file for you and which show the data to you. So means for the writing a data and reading the data, the file system will decide a way of organizing data. So this is the way in which you can So see here, this is the way. So this is a particular way in which represent how the data will stored over the file system through the, if I store through the notepad to the hard disk. Now if I use the database system for storing the data, so in this scenario, suppose if you want to store a data, you need to use one of the database engine. So there are lots of database engines are there for storing data like MySQL, Oracle. So this engine will through which you can store data. But whenever you want to interact with this engine, it requires a language for the database switch. So that is nothing but SQL. So through the SQL, you can write a data into this database. So this database allowed to store data in the table format. So you're creating first table and then you're storing your data like same roll number and name. So these are the data you have created in by using in a database. So when you created this data, if you want to store in the hard disk, again this data is forwarded to the file system. File system will store the data into the hard disk. So whenever you want to read this data, again this data comes from the hard disk to the file system, and such data will open in the GUI of database. It might be in the Oracle or SQL. So this is also a way by which you can read and write the data. So in the database system, file system also responsible to decide how to store and organize the data. But again the question is file system. So if I see these two scenario, file system and database system, so in both scenario it will look like the same thing. The file system used for storing a data, only the difference the application used for storing data is different. In the file system I use the notepad, in the database I use the either Oracle or MySQL. So again the even the if I show with the way how the file system and database system store data, again the problem, again the same question is what is exact difference. But if I go with the closer look with this particular file system and database system, you can easily understand what is the difference. So if I go with this scenario, both are used for storing a data. What is the big difference between these two is the first is what a file system will store a data which called as raw data. Raw data means the data which does not having the structure. So in this example, if your notepad data is stored in the hard disk, it will store the continuous. So that data does not have any structure. So that file system will store the raw data. But if I go with the database system, it will store a data which called as structured data, because your database will store data in the table format which having the particular fields and the types of field by which the data gets organized, and such structured data stored in the database system. So this is the first difference between the file system and database system. What's the second difference? If I go with the file system and if I access data, the file will allows to access data by the sequentially. Means if you want to access the fifth record, I need to travel the first four and then I can get the fifth one data. So means the file system you can access the sequential access, not the random access. But in case of database system, database itself having the SQL query language by which you can write a query, and through that query you can access the random access. Means whichever data you want you can access from the table. Even that data is the last of your table, you can access directly. But in the case of file system, such a random access is not allowed, it is sequential access. So this is about the second difference about the sequential access and random access. So if I consider the file system is useful whenever we have a small data. That time file system is appropriate, because from the small data you can easily access data even if it's a sequential. But if it's a big data in large data, then definitely you have to go with the database system. So this is roughly idea between the what is the difference between the file system and database system. Now before this file system, but whenever if you store a data by using file system, how this file system is used for storing the data also, because in that scenario also that file system also having the drawbacks. So the next point is we discuss, that is how the data will access by using the file system and how the data will access by using database. As the aim of this subject, that is database is used for storing a data. But if you before this database, if I go with the C plus programming, if you want to store a data, normally in the programming we use the variable. So the variable we are created for storing a data, but that variable is only available when that program is created, that time variable is created, and whenever you store data for that program only, that variable is available. After that program, if I try to access that data, it is not available. Means a memory for that variable is only created for that program only. So means a variable is not means variable not store permanent data. So if you want a permanent storage, then C and C plus programming provide a file mechanism. So if file is what, file is a storage in which you can store data in permanently. Means even the program is not available, still you can access data from the file. So if such a file is used for the storing a data, then how the data accessed by using the file system? as you are aware about this, because you already know the C and C plus programming. So if you want to access the file, what is the mechanism? You have to write a programming, like you have to write a program by using either C, C plus or Java. You have to write a program in which, through that program, you have to first create the file in which you are storing a data. Then in that file, once it is created, you have to write a code for the write data into the file. So you have to use the file function for writing data into the file. So by using that file function, you can store data into the file. Once you store data by using a write function, then you have to use a read functions of read a data from the file. So this is a ready-made function for which you can read the data. Means whenever you want to store data or you want to access data from the file, you need to write a program by using a front-end language. So this is a way by which you can access data using the file system. But if the scenario, but this a way of accessing data in the file system has lots of drawbacks. The next slide will go with that drawback. But if I go with the database, how the data will access? Your data is available in the database, so no need to write a program. Only you have to write a query by using the data in the language which known to the database. So you have to write a query which by using a database language which known to the database, which is the SQL query. So you have to write a query. So that query is responsible only for fetching the data. So it is very small query. You write like select star from student, it will get the all data from student. If I write select star from student with roll number is 2, it will fetch only roll number 2 data. Means only a small query is enough for getting the data. There is no need to write the separate program. So that is the way how the data is accessed to the using file system and database system. Now you are aware about this file system. Now if I go with this type of data access by using the file system, what are the drawbacks? Because definitely this way of accessing data having the drawback, or this way of storing data having drawback, that's why we go in the database. Now in the next we'll see what are the drawbacks with the file system. And as we have discussed, this is drawback of file system, and this same point we can use for as an advantage of database system, and the same point we are used for the differentiation between the file system and database system. So the first drawback of the file system is data reductancy and inconsistency. So what is this data reductancy and inconsistency? As your data, same data is stored in the multiple file, and that multiple file having a different format for storing a data. And because your same data is available in your multiple file, so there is a duplication of information occur in the different file. So that point is called as data reductancy, means data is reductant in the multiple file. Same data is available in the multiple file. And inconsistency means what? If I change the data from one of the file, and suppose in the next time my one of the program access my same data from another file, but because of which you already made the changes on one file, and if I access the another file, so you will get the old data. So means during the access of data, you will get the inconsistency of data. So this is a drawbacks with the file system. It's called a data redundancy and inconsistency. Now I will explain this particular point with the example. Now see here what is data redundancy and inconsistency. Now suppose the student, the customer data, which having the like customer data is address, which is suppose this address data is stored in the customer file also. If I using file system, what is the approach? I will store this address information in the customer file, which along with all the customer details. Might be this address of that customer is also available with the account information, which account contain account detail information. Along with the address is also there. And if there is a loan detail information, it also contain the address. So same the address information of the customer is available in the customer also, account also, and loan also. So what is the redundancy means? A same information which we are considered that this is address XYZ, it is available in the three file. So it is called as data redundancy. One more, the best example, now take your information like student data. It is also available, your roll number, name, and address is also available in the department itself. It is also available in the office file also. That same data is also available in the your TPO section also, training and placement office also. So might be so that is about the means what is the first drawback is the data redundancy, means same information is available in the multiple file. So that we call the redundancy of the data. This is the first drawback, is called data redundancy. This is because of file system. And along with this inconsistency. What is my inconsistency? Suppose as your data is available in the multiple file, now suppose your address is changed from XYZ to the PQR. So what is the approach? I will write one program. By that program, I can write a C program by which I can access the file which contain my address. So I will definitely access the file customer which contain customer data. So through that program, I will read the data for the XYZ address, and then program will change their data from XYZ to the PQR, and such a PQR value again write back to the customer file. Means after this program, when you run this program, the file content of XYZ get replaced with the PQR. Means address change from XYZ to PQR. But now suppose that person already had taken a loan, and the loan person wants to give someone of one letter to that on that particular address, or that person loan department wants that person address. So they will use their loan file, and if they are try to access the address, they will get the XYZ. But actually your that address of that person changed from XYZ to PQR, and it is only changes to the customer file, but which is not reflected to the account and loan. If anyone has accessed the account and loan with the address field, they will get the inconsistent data. Means as your data stored in the multiple file, it creates redundancy, and if change in one file, it does not reflect to the other, it creates the inconsistency. So this is the first drawback, that is data redundancy and inconsistency in the file system. This is a problem because we use the file system. But if I go with the database, what is the database having the advantages about the redundancy and inconsistency? So in database, there is no redundancy and no inconsistency. How there is no redundancy? Database will like in this same scenario, data will store the same information in the one table only, and other table only contain the reference of that data. That other references which doesn't contain the same data, they just contain the reference of origin data only. So means in database only one copy is available and other are only having the reference. So there is no chance of data redundancy in the database. And what is inconsistency? In database, if suppose there is a change from XYZ to the PQR address, so it will change the original file data, which is XYZ to PQR. So automatically, if original file has changed the data to XYZ to the PQR, then definitely the references also get the value which is modified data. So means there is no chance of getting inconsistency in the multiple accessing. So that is about the advantage of database. There is no redundancy and inconsistency. So this is the first drawback of file system, which is data redundancy and inconsistency. Now see what is the second drawback? Is a difficulty in accessing data. As you know, when we use the file system, if you want to access data from the file system, you need to write a program, and that program is having functions for reading and writing data from the file. So means whenever user wants to access any data for particular task, every time that user needs to contact to the application program for writing a new program, and that new program is responsible to give the data as per the user requirement. So means every time without the application program, you are not able to access the data. So that we call as difficulty in accessing data. So I will go with the example. What is the difficulty in accessing data? Suppose I have stored the information in the file student with a roll number, subject and mark. So this file is already available. Suppose first user wants all marks of student. So then what? Then user go to the application programmer. Application programmer write a C, C+ or Java program in which that program will read the data from the file and will display to the user. So for that user will write that programmer will write one program. So that user request is satisfied. Again, suppose user want a minimum mark. So that user doesn't having that way to accessing it. Even the programmer doesn't having the way of accessing mean data. So again, user go to the application, programmer will check is there already program is written. If no program is written, again programmer will write a new program for accessing minimum balance. So all the balance will access, then the program will write a code for accessing the minimum and such data display to the user. Later, suppose user wants the maximum mark. Again, the user will go to the application program. Again, write the program, and that program will read data from, and then the data will be retrieved. Means what is difficult access? Every time when user have a new task to accessing data, each time it needs to contact to the application programmer for writing a program, and that program is responsible for accessing data. So that's why it creates a difficulty in access data in the file system. But in the database, there is no difficulty of accessing data. Your data gets directly accessed by a query mechanism. Even data is available on the database. In database system, the query for each and every task, there is no need to write a program. You have to write only separate query by which you can get a data directly from that query. So there is no need to write the application program. You just only learn with database language by which you have to write a query only, and from that query you can get a data. So this is the second drawback with the file system, which is difficulty in accessing data. Then next, third drawback is data isolation. So what is the data isolation? Multiple files and formats, and it is inconvenience in the data sharing. Now, as you know, suppose if your same data is available in the multiple file, might be that file storage will store that file having same data will store by the different type. So if anyone tried to, because of multiple file having same data stored in different format, might be because of accessing user will get a different format data. The same data user will get in the different format. And if that data is shared among them by the multiple user, that time the every user will get the inconvenience data which is not in appropriate format. So I will explain this also point with what is data isolation. Now, this is one example. Suppose your data that we discussed, your data is available, student data is available in the department also, it is also available in the office also, and TP also, which having the roll number, name, and address. And along with this, one field is called as sex of the student, which also store. Might be this field of the sex of student in the department is stored as a string, which is a male, female. Might be the same field stored in the office file as a only one character, which is M and F. And might be the same field which is of that student is stored in the TPU by a true and false which is a Boolean type. Means when any program wants to access the data, might be it can access by any file which contains, because all the file contains same data. So through the one file it will get the character string, through the one will get the character only, and one will get the Boolean value. But all the data is same. But because of file having the different format, you will get the same data with the different format. And as user, if the single user want access, so it creates a confusion that there are different data, but even that data are the same data. So this drawback is called as data isolation. But what about database? There is no chance of data isolation, because your information singly stored in one table and all other are contain only reference. So that's why while creating this value in the first table only, they have decided the type. So other those who are getting the reference in the database, they are accessing the same data type because they are stored in the original file. So in the there is no chance of data isolation in the database. So that is a drawback. This is a drawback about the. This is a third drawback. The fourth drawback in the database system is the integrity problem. Now, what is this integrity problem? Uh, uh, in the file system, as integrity constraint, for example, account balance less than 0. So if you want to apply such type of constraint, which is like suppose file is having the data with a balance, and suppose you want to apply the constraint which is the balance of in the file should be less than 0. This is called as a constraint on the data apply on the which store in the file. So if you want to apply such a constraint in the file system, you have to write a code in the program, and then program will check whether if the balance is less than, if balance is greater than 0, then only store into the file. If it is less than 0, then it is not allowed to store in the file. So for that constraint, if you want to apply in the file system, you have to write the separate code. And suppose if you want to add a new constraint or change the existing one, again you need to modify the program which having the constraint. But it is very difficult to change the constraint in the file. So that such type of problem is called as integrity problem. So file having there's no, in the file system there's no integrity constraint you cannot apply with the file, but this integrity constraint will comes with the database system. So for this I will explain the example what is this integrity constraint. Now suppose there is a one file which store the account information which consists of account number and balance, and suppose what you are expecting, the balance stored in this file should be always greater than 500. So for that purpose, how we achieve this in the file? Because by file will store any data. File doesn't check the constraint for storing a data. Any type of data stored in the file. So if you want to apply the constraint on such a file, I will write that constraint on the program. This is a choice for choice. Then in the program, I will write a code for whenever user enter the balance value, the program will check if the balance greater than 500, then it only write into the file. And suppose if balance greater than 500, then it might be suppose 700. The program will check if it is greater than 700. If it is above 500, then program will write the data into the file. But suppose user has entered the 200, because of the program, if it is not greater than 500, so it doesn't store into the file. So likewise, to apply the constraint in the file, it needs to write a code in the program. Suppose, so means you cannot apply such a constraint on the file directly. But if I go with the database, while creating the database as a table, and in that, so database provide the facility that field can apply the constraint, field having comes with the constraint also. Means suppose if the field is balance, and if I apply the constraint on the balance, the value stored in the balance always greater than 500. So whenever user try to store the value in the balance, always this balance field, the constraint of balance always check value stored in balance is greater than 500 or not. If it is above 500, then and only database store the value find above that value in the balance, otherwise it does not store. Means database itself comes with the constraint, but file does not having such a constraint, it is comes with the program. Suppose one more drawback this integrity, suppose the programmer wants to, like, suppose I want to change the constraint with the file, instead of 500 greater than balance greater than 500, I want the balance greater than 1000. So already data is stored with the file with greater than 500, and suppose if you want to again change the constraint with greater than 500, so you cannot apply that constraint on the existing data. Whichever new data you're storing in the file, for that you can apply the constraint of greater than 1000 through the program, but you cannot get the you cannot change for it the value which already stored less than 1000. So means in the file system it's very difficult to add a new constraint, and it's very difficult to apply the existing constraint. And if you want to update it, first you need to delete all the record which is less than 1000 from the existing file, and then for the new you have to apply the constraint with the 1000. So this means creates the complications for if you want to add a new constraint or if you want to update the constraint in the file system. So that is about the drawbacks with the file system about the integrity constraint. So this is a fourth drawback. The next drawback is fifth one is atomicity of the update. As you know, failures may live in the database is create the inconsistency state because of partial updates are carried out. Means suppose during the you are changing the value in the database, if you have performed some partial changes, so because of partial changes, what happen? There is partial changes performed in database, and when you have to access data, you will get the inconsistent data. So for that, I will use the example. What is that atomicity? Atomicity means either that whole whichever transaction perform is either completely all perform or not at all. Means partial is not allowed. But file system having this atomicity problem. What is that? Suppose the example. Suppose I want to transfer some fund from one account to the another account. So expecting what is atomicity? So during this transfer of fund, that expected this transfer should be performed either complete or not at all. Means either complete means it will remove from the one account and deposit to the one account. This is called as whole complete. What is the part not at all means? Not at all means either it does not deducted and is not deposited. So this is not any single statements performed. So such a thing we call as atomicity. So what is that atomicity in the file? Suppose if there is a one account file where all the account information is stored, like account information of A with the balance, account information of B, and what is the task I want to perform with the file transferring rupees 500 from account A to the B. Suppose this task I want to perform. So what is the strategy through the file system? I will write one program. So what is the steps in the program? First, I will read the value of A, which I'll access the current balance, which is the 1000. Then in the program, I will change A is equals to A minus 500. So it will change the value with A on the program, and whatever update value again I perform right back to the A. So after changing this A is equals to A minus 500, exit value is 1000 minus 500 is 500. So that right aim is this 1000 value get override by new value is 500, and as it is deposited into B, so again I will read a B value, so it will access the current balance is 2000. Then is perform B is equals to B plus 500, it is on the program itself, and then whatever changes value, that is 2000 plus 500 is 2500, which write back to the B. So write B will store the value 2500. So old value 2000 get overwrite with 2500. So means if you want to perform transferring rupees 500 from A to B, you need to perform this all 6 steps together. So means if you want to transfer this all 500 from A to B, this all steps should be performed completely. So that concept is called as atomicity. Means either these whole steps are performed completely or not at all. Not at all means either it is not read the values also. So this property is called as atomicity. So this atomicity is problem with the file system. What is that? Suppose if there are 6 steps are performed, and suppose failure is occur after the third step. So because of third step has 3 step has successfully completed, and at the start of fourth step the failure is occurred. That failure may be hardware failure, software failure, or any power failure. So in that case, the 3-step perform means it will read the value, it will deduct it from 500 from A and write back to the means file had changed the A balance with 500. But after failure, there is no changes performed on the B account. So means the partial changes are performed. Because of the partial, what is the balance of A after the partial changes? A with 500 and B with 2000 itself. Means because of partial changes, there is an inconsistent of data because we are expecting data after this transfer. A is 500, B is 2500, but because of partial updates, you are only getting A with 500, B with 2000 as it is. Means it is withdrawal from A but not deposit the B. Such partial changes may be definitely occur through the file system because file allow for partial changes. But if I go with the database does not allow for the partial changes. Means if I consider this six step, database create all these steps together as a one transaction. And because of transaction, the transaction having the properties atomicity. That atomicity means either the transaction wholly completed or not at all. So partial transaction is not allowed in the database itself. Means even you withdraw the value, after failure is occur, data will show the old value because the partial changes are performed temporary on the local copy. They are not performed on the permanent copy. So such a mechanism atomicity is available in the is available in database, but it is not available in the file system. So atomicity update is a drawback of file system, but the database having the advantage of atomicity. So this is a fifth drawback. Next, a concurrence access by the multiple user. As if I store a data, then if you want to access faster data, if faster data if you want to access, then in the today's environment, that every application want concurrent access, means multiple user can access the same data. So why it is that we want the concurrent access? Because to increase the performance of application, concurrent access, for increase the performance, we allow for concurrent access. Because if you are not allow the concurrent access, if two-person want to access data, one person needs to wait until the first person has accessed the data. So if we provide the sequential access, it takes some more time. So that's why in the today's application we want concurrent access, means multiple user can access same data at the same time for increasing the performance. But if we allow the multiple user to access the same data, it should be uncontrolled concurrent access. If it is uncontrolled concurrent access, which leads to inconsistent data, means for example, two people reading data and updating at the same time. So the reader person will get a data which not updated by the second person. So that means get the inconsistent data if concurrent access is allowed. But in the file system, if concurrent access by the multiple user, then definitely result will get the inconsistency. But in database, even the concurrent user access the data, database control that access by the concurrency control mechanism, and by which it spills to user, it perform in the concurrently, but database will handle in the sequentially. So this is the advantage of database. So I will explain with the example what is concurrent access. Suppose we have a one account file in which all the accounting numbers and their balance are stored, and suppose there is one account which having the joint account. So there are two user A1 and A2, both can access the value. So in this A1 A2, so what are the steps? If A1 wants to withdraw 1000 and A2 wants to withdraw 2000, and A having exist balance 500. So if both are withdrawing at the same time, so what are the steps performed by A? Read A, then A is equals to A minus 1000, write A. In case of file system, and it is also perform read A minus 2000, write A. So now when both are accessing read value, it will access A value. So both will get the 5000 in the read. Then A is 5000 minus 1000 is 4000. When write A, it is 4000 value. In this scenario, the write has 3000 value. So whichever has performed the last write operation, might be suppose this is performed the first, it will A value 5000 changes with 4000, and because of this last write A, this 4000 can override with 3000. Means after this the account A balance is 3000. But if I go with this scenario, the actual withdrawal from A is what? 3000. So after this 3000, the balance is required is what? 2000. But because of this type of file handling mechanism, it show the inconsistent data which is 3000. So this is problem because file system allow anyone can access at the same time. But in case of database system, even the same scenario, if both are accessing at the same time, if whichever has accessed the requested first, that person will get right spot data, and that person will lock that data item. So in this, when A1 perform read A, that time it lock that item. So even A2 is requested at that time, A2 will get a waiting time. A2 was in the waiting time till the A1 is complete. So A1 first complete this all. When write A is performed, A1 will release that data, then A2 will access it. So A2 will read the data which is updated by A1, which is 4000. And then when you perform minus 2000, it will get the 2000 as a balance. And such a 2000 will store as a final balance. Means in the database, even concurrent user are access, it fails to the user like it is performed concurrently, but database handle it serially. It will first perform those who are requested first completely, and after that it will allow for the Second, so such a concurrent access is allowed in database, but result should be in the consistent data. But in the file system, if file system allow the concurrent access, result should be in the inconsistent data. So this is about drawback with the file system of the concurrent access. And the last drawback is the security problem. In the file system, there's no any if there is a concurrent access are there's no any access control mechanism, there's no any security. So what is the security role in the file system? Suppose if if you want, if you want the age balance, then your program will allow to read the whole files of account, so that person can get the all the account balance from the file, because file having no any security mechanism, anyone can access that file and will get the all the data, so all access file. But in case of database, there should be a mechanism for random access by which it will check the role based security. So depends upon the user rights, it will decide the role, and that person only can see that view of part of data. So such a data abstraction actually in the database, through which only whichever request data is accessed by the user only. But in the file, along with that data, so other data can access, it is possible with the file system. So there is no security mechanism in the file system, and but in the database there is a security mechanism. So these are the 7 drawbacks with the file system. So if I again revise, the first is the data reductancy and inconsistency, second is data isolation, third is the third is atomicity problem, fourth is what your concurrent access, fifth is what your security problem. And these are the drawbacks which a file system, and also these are the advantages of database system. So these are the 7 points are very important, which is drawbacks of file system, and which also the advantage of database system. And these also points are used for differentiate between the file system and database system. Thank you.